Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started? Um, I wanted to just say we're coming up to what's going on now with the Hamas-Israeli war, and it happened on October the 7th. It's exactly 50 years since the Yom Kippur War, which is in October of 1973, and they meant it. Does anybody know with Hamas what bullets were used? Which country were they manufactured in? I'm sorry? They're Russian, but everything else is Iranian. They funded it, they did all this other stuff, and everybody thinks, oh, it's just, this particular area. So how many people were killed altogether in the Hamas October 7th massacre? 1,200 is right. And then how many were seized? About 240 were kidnapped, and only about half of that has actually been restored. So we're seeing this infiltration, and it's like the whole truth doesn't seem to come out until way after. We're three months into this before we actually find out what's going on. So I'm going to pass most of these things. I just wanted to say that the Suez Crisis was that was 1956, because Great Britain and France basically said to Israel, we want you to attack Egypt so that we can get this Suez Canal back, because they attacked and took over the Suez Canal. So, and we talked about Adolf Eichmann and that huge trial that took place in Israel. And the reason why that was so much at the forefront, if you were a Holocaust survivor living in Israel, how were you treated? If you, in the 1950s and 60s. You would have thought they would have been venerated and honored and looked after. For some reason, it was the opposite, because they kept saying among themselves, well, we would have fought our way out, we would have done something. We wouldn't have been lambs to the slaughter. And it wasn't until the Eichmann trial that one simple truth came out. They had one of the Jewish refugees who was in one of the death camps in Poland, and he gave testimony, and they asked him that very question. You all had thousands right there. Why didn't you rise up and fight against your oppressors? And he said, 5 miles away was a Polish camp where Poles were imprisoned. He said, if they could do an insurrection and get away, they're in their own home country. If we, as Jews, overthrew our captors, where are we gonna go? We got no homeland, and that resonated throughout the country, and there was a big paradigm shift because of that. So in leading up to the 6-Day War, I just want to say this. Somebody probably knows this famous quote, but I want you to tell me who said it. You can look it up on your phones if you want to. There are two types of people: those who think there are no miracles and everything is just happenstance, and the other that thinks there's a constant set of miracles. Yes, Martha? It's Albert Einstein. Pretty amazing that a Jew and a scientist like that would think that way, that there are miracles constantly happening. What amazes me is as believers, a lot of times we're more skeptical and we're unwilling to believe the miracles that happened in history. That's why I think it's so important to see that God's hand is in it all. So there's a lot of miracles that happen in the 6-Day War, more so than anybody thought. I mean, just unbelievable. When the guy got to choose, one of the military commanders, what are you going to name this war now that it's over? He says, I'm going to name it after creation. And they were like, what? In 6 days, God created the earth, and in 6 days, we have reclaimed our nation. So that's what they compared it with. That's why it's called the 6-Day War. So I'll read a little piece of this, and we can get yours whenever you want. So 55 years ago, June the 5th, 1967, marked the beginning of the 6-Day War, from the 5th to the 10th, during that time, God's fulfillment of his ancient promises is recorded in 1 Kings 11:36, where he proclaimed Jerusalem as a city where I have chosen for myself and to put my name. So did the Jews get involved in the Six-Day War because they wanted to? No. So the revisionist history is Israel did this as a land grab to get to get Gaza, the Golan Heights, and Jerusalem. Getting Jerusalem was never in the cards. They never even thought about it. It was something that happened, and then they got it back, which was pretty remarkable. So there's an excellent book by Cambridge University Press about the Six-Day War, and what's so wonderful is they sent historians 30 years after the war was over to all the archives of Jordan, Syria, Egypt, England, France, the United States, because they were all involved in some aspect of it, and they asked them to look at the original memos, look at the transcripts of the phone calls, and tell us what really happened. Because there's been so much revisionist history, and that's why I hate revisionist history, because it's hardly ever based on evidence. They showed that these 7 nations were coming against Israel to destroy them for complete genocide. It wasn't for any other objective than that. And instead, they were able to destroy all their air forces and destroy their power and take back their land. So it says, when the war began, however, Jerusalem was a divided city under the control of Jordan following the 1948 War of Independence. Israel's holiest sites, the Western Wall and the Temple Mount, were still off limits to the Jews, and Israel had won its War of Independence, but lost the eastern half of Jerusalem to the Arab League. So they still didn't have the capital city. So 1967 is so significant because they got this land back. Can I get a reader for this slide? If everybody's in the back. Thank you.
The Jordanians annexed East Jerusalem, which deteriorated under their rule. They destroyed all but one synagogue in the Jewish quarter, along with the Torah scrolls and books. Religious freedom was non-existent. Palestinian Arabs called themselves Arabs, not Palestinians, since Arafat had changed their names to Palestinians for his political purposes. Jordan never considered Jerusalem as its or the Palestine capital. However, the prologue for the Six-Day War reached back to Jordan's annexation of East Jerusalem and the West Bank in 1950. Over the next 20 years, frequent confrontations contributed to the buildup of war. Among them, Egypt, armed with Soviet weapons, closed the Suez Canal to Israeli shipping. In 1959, Yasser Arafat founded the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, with the goal of destroying Israel. 3 Arab summits were held to plan Israel's annihilation. From the Golan Heights, Syria shelled Israeli civilians in the Galilee below. Clashes escalated during the 1966 and 1967.
Thank you. So it goes to show you, when Jordan had this country from 1948 to 1967, they never considered Jerusalem the capital, ever. And the name Palestinian didn't come about until Arafat decided to use it to try to get some leverage. The other thing is that Arafat never wanted peace with Israel, never. All they wanted was constant war to keep the fight going so that a genocide would be the end goal all along. We're going to see when we get to the peace agreement with President Clinton, Clinton actually told Arafat, you made me a failure as a president because I gave you everything and you turned it all down. So it's pretty incredible. Can I get a reader for this slide? Thanks, Daniel.
Then in May 1967, Egypt declared war on Israel. Radio Cairo broadcasted an ominous message. The existence of Israel has continued too long. The battle has come in which we shall destroy Israel. Such menacing talk from Egypt, joined by Syria, Jordan, and Iraq, supported by Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, and Sudan, with the small Jewish nation's military on high alert. The Israel Defense Force, or IDF, had also witnessed a formidable building of troops and weaponry in the Sinai Desert, representing a huge threat. So sure were the Israelis of defeat, they prepared 40,000 coffins. Realizing they would be vastly outmanned in the battle, the Israelis put into effect a gutsy, preemptive strategy that relied on speed and secrecy. It was named Operation Focus. Israel's military leaders determined that the only way to defeat Egypt's vast superior air force, the largest in the Middle East, was to make a preemptive strike and neutralize all the planes while they were still sitting on the ground. Their pilots had trained long and well for just such a mission, and on June 5th, they set it in motion.
So I want you to think about this like David and Goliath. There's really no other comparison. These guys are armed to the teeth. They've got air forces in 7 different countries. They're all coordinated. They're all ready to attack. And it's like, unless he does a preemptive attack like David did with Goliath and sling that stone early, it was all going to be over. And they saw the writing on the wall. They were like, we have to do this now. Once the battle starts, it's too late, because the air forces were like 3 or 4 times the size of Israel's. They only left 12 planes on the ground. Every other aircraft was flying. What do you think about that one, our pilot from?
Pilots were just sitting in the cockpits in the heat of the day, and as soon as they got the call, they blast off. And they were flying Mirage 3s, which are a high altitude interceptor made for going really fast, and they actually dog fought against the Egyptians. So the planes were not really suited for the role that they put them in, but they used them beautifully, and they just really won the day.
And they really flew low over the whole Sinai. They were only like a couple hundred feet off the ground, which is absolutely incredible. And this is going to be a huge difference with the Yom Kippur War, which is similar to what we just experienced in October, because they were totally unprepared. They had no idea this was going to happen, but there were warning signs. So can I get another reader for the slide? Go ahead.
Operation Focus remains one of the most successful air campaigns in military history. During the Six-Day War, the Israeli Air Force destroyed 452 enemy planes while losing just 46 of their own. After their stunning performance in Egypt, the Israeli Air Force finished the day in Jerusalem, bombing the Jordanian tanks that they raced toward the city and providing air cover for Israeli ground forces. It was an epic example of cunning, daring, and stealth. Brilliant strategy that was flawlessly executed. During the brief war, Israel won the Golan Heights from Syria, the Sinai from Egypt, and Judea and Samaria, West Bank, and Jerusalem's old city and holy sites from the Jordan's occupation. Israel quadrupled its size. But those who fought in that war agreed that it was more than military genius and bravery that led to victory. There were numerous miracles as well.
It was a series of miracles on top of each other. So how many of you all are, like, we're Christadelphians, so we're not so familiar with these, but where is military strategy taught? How about that? In the United States. West Point, Navy War College, for the Air Force, it's in Colorado Springs. Do they study this? No. Why? That's the truth. They won't study it because it's unreal. They're like, something happened, it's a quirk, it's a fluke, you know, we can't use this because it's so unreal. It defies all the laws of warfare from time immemorial. So that's what I think is so unreal, and we don't get excited about it as Christadelphians. The Six-Day War is unprecedented. They quadrupled their size. They went from a piece of Swiss cheese that was given to them by the United Nations into a full-fledged country. I mean, that's astounding. United States only fought for its land during the Revolutionary War, okay? We bought the Louisiana Purchase, as we've studied in this class, because Napoleon ran out of war cash. So he came to Jefferson, he's like, let's make a deal. I'll sell you the whole Louisiana Purchase, you give me some money and I'll continue my war in Europe and you can have all this land. We bought it for 3 cents an acre. I guess you count the Mexican-American War and a couple of the skirmishes along the border as to how we got Texas and the rest of the West, but it wasn't hard fought like this land was from one end to the other. Can I get another reader? Go ahead, Debbie is going to read.
Although outmanned and outnumbered, the Israeli fighter pilots realized that God's supernatural intervention secured their victory. Pilot and IDF Major General Ezer Weizman was asked to explain how for 3 hours Israel Air Force planes destroyed aircraft at one Egyptian airstrip after another. Yet the Egyptians did not radio ahead to let their forces know about the imminent air attacks. Weizman, who later served as president of Israel, said simply, "The finger of God." Many eyewitness accounts, which have been well documented, emerged in the following months. Older airplanes that had been plagued with problems behaved surprisingly well that day. Squadron members who flew the aging Vaughter bomber said that on June 5th, the aging aircraft operated without a single malfunction. An enemy shell that made a direct hit on a munitions pile miraculously failed to explode.
I mean, it's incredible because Egypt not only was ready to do this strike against Israel, Israel flew low over the whole Sinai Peninsula so they wouldn't be picked up by, say it with me now, radar. And when they got there, they bombed the first set of airfields, destroyed over half of their entire air force. And then they sent out a second wave thinking they're really going to be in for a fight because we've already destroyed all these aircraft. They didn't radio to tell what was going on. And Jordan had given their whole air force to Egypt, so theirs got destroyed. So the second wave came down and destroyed every airfield. There was no way to take off, even if you had a plane that worked. So in the first day, that's one of the major miracles that took place. So I'm going to show you this video. Tell me if the sound works. I hope it does.
News brings you the latest incident to upset the chancelleries of
the Muslim nations in the Middle East would not accept Israel's existence since its founding in 1948. They began amassing huge amounts of sophisticated weaponry and lobbying for the implementation of boycotts, divestment, and sanctions against the Jewish state. On the 15th of May, 1967, on Israel's Independence Day, a 3-week period began, which was one of the most tense and fearful periods in Israel's history. In direct contravention of international agreements, Egyptian leader Jamal Abdel Nasser removed...
Okay, so Gamal Abdel Nasser was the one who was building the Aswan High Dam. First, he asked America, Great Britain to finance it. We were willing to do it, but he was playing both ends against the middle, and he got the Russians to pay for it. Then right after that, he attacked the Suez Canal and got that. So this guy's whole mission is not just Egypt. What does he really want? Does anybody know what Nasser really wanted? He wanted to be in charge of the entire Arab League. He wanted all the countries to look to him as the leader in the entire Middle East and North Africa. So this guy is just very power hungry and is constantly looking at a way to provoke Israel.
The UN peacekeeping forces and began moving tens of thousands of soldiers and hundreds of tanks into what was the demilitarized Sinai Peninsula towards Israel's southern border. Egypt also blockaded the Straits of Tiran, an open international waterway which was essentially a declaration of war. Israel turned to the nations of the world, primarily to the United States, for assistance against Egyptian aggression, but somehow all Western countries decided to remain neutral. Very quickly it became apparent that the promises were all but forgotten. Israel, with 2.5 million Jews, was left alone to face the might of the Arab nations. Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon formed a military alliance and began moving forces into Jordan towards Israel's borders. When the Arab countries realized that the world had abandoned Israel, many other Muslim countries were openly calling for the destruction of Israel. The will and means to murder millions of Jews were evident. Top IDF commanders expressed their concerns at the high price Israel was liable to pay in a war with the Arab world. Some military experts projected a toll between 20 and 100,000 lives. Israel prepared cemeteries all over the country, ready to accommodate many expected victims. Massive parks were prepared in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and other cities in case the cemetery.
That's no joke. They actually built 40,000 coffins because they thought that's how high the casualty rates were. They turned their city parks into mass cemeteries just because they thought they were going to be slaughtered so badly during this war. I'm sorry the sound is not great, but
Cemeteries would have more space. World governments, instead of defending Israel's right to exist, warned Israel continuously not to attack. However, the people of Israel had no choice but to go to war, to defend their country and their very existence. At 7:15 a.m. on June 5th, 1967, the IDF launched Operation Moked, Focus. Almost the entire Israeli Air Force was dispatched in a daring mission. Only 12 planes stayed behind. The risk of this operation was extreme, as the fighter pilots flew at an unprecedented low altitude of less than 20 meters above the ground. Egypt had the most advanced ground-air missile defense systems in the Middle East. Most of the Israeli jets were old and outdated French planes. If the Israeli jets would have been detected, many would have fallen, and Israel would have been left with practically no air force. And then, a miracle occurred. The most advanced Russian MiG jets that patrolled the airspace along the borders between Egypt and Israel were, for that one critical hour, grounded. Incredibly, at that very same time, the top commanders of Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq flew together to observe the Egyptian forces invading Sinai. The Egyptian...
So this is critical. Their ears are turned off, their eyes are turned off for 1 hour. They're always sending up surveillance planes to see what activity is going on. And for this 1 hour, they weren't operational. Their planes were grounded, which is unheard of. It gave the unprecedented opportunity for Israel to fly in and do all this, which is God's hand in it all again.
Officers had ordered all anti-aircraft units not to fire unless given a direct order as long as they were in flight. This created total confusion on the Egyptian ground as Israel struck exactly in that window of time. By 7:45 a.m., the high hand of Providence resulted in the Israeli Air Force reaching all the Egyptian airfields without even one plane being detected. More than 200 Egyptian planes, almost half of Egypt's fleets, were almost instantaneously destroyed, also bombing the runways and making impotent the mightiest air force in the Middle East. General Moti Hod, commander of the Air Force, said, "In my wildest dreams, I never would have conceived of such an incredible success." A second wave of Israeli jets were directed to Cairo to confront the remains of the Egyptian Air Force. And here, another miracle occurred, no less miraculous than the first. Even though Israel had lost the element of surprise and the anti-aircraft systems were operating with full capacity, Egypt was only able to hit one Israeli plane. The Israeli Air Force went on to destroy a total of more than 300 Egyptian planes, and every airfield in Egypt was neutralized. It was nothing less than a military miracle, seemingly impossible. And then, another miracle occurred. It was as if God hardened the heart of the Egyptian president Nasser, who continuously gloated about his glorious military victory over Israel. In the Arab media, President Nasser spoke of the end of Israel's air force and of the Egyptian tanks on their way.
So what I just want to say about this, Nasser tried to fool the rest of the world and its own people. Instead of telling the truth that Israel had taken out its entire air force, he broadcasted victory after victory, that they were taking Jerusalem, they were doing all this stuff, and he lied to his own allies, to Jordan, to Syria, and to Iraq, and told them, "Come on down, we're winning." And he was inviting them because he had nothing left already at this point. So it's like we're seeing right now, lies upon lies upon lies about Hamas, and they were doing the same thing in 1967. You know, Hamas wants everybody to believe that Israel's committing genocide by defending itself, and it's ridiculous. So we'll continue.
way to Jerusalem. Jordan, Syria, and Iraq believed these bombastic statements and wanted to join in the great victory against the Jews. All the Arab air power struck simultaneously on multiple fronts. In almost any other scenario, Israel would not have been able to respond as quickly as it did. The timing was seemingly orchestrated to position Israeli jets exactly where they should be. Not in 6 days, but in 6 hours, the war was won.
A biblical prophecy comes to pass as the forces of Israel sweep on in an astonishing triumph of strategy. After achieving air supremacy, her forces thrust like an avenging sword at the very heart of Arab self-confidence.
And then, perhaps, the greatest miracle of all, a miracle Israel never expected: Jerusalem. Again, it seemed as though it was a divine appointment in time. Jerusalem was to be restored to the Jewish people after 2,000 years. The enemies of Israel had twice as many soldiers as we did, 3 times as many planes, 4 times as many tanks. The odds were stacked against us on every military front. The love of Israel, self-sacrifice, and courage of the Israeli soldiers, combined with divine guidance and assistance, made these miracles possible. Yitzhak Rabin, then Minister of Defense, was given the honor of giving the war its name. He chose the 6-day war, recalling the 6 days of creation, as Israel too was created with the liberation of Jerusalem. As the center of gravity of the Jewish people has now returned to the land of our fathers, the Torah center of the world has once again returned to Jerusalem. The chief rabbinate of the state of Israel has established the 28th of Iyar, a day of Hallel and Hodayah, praise and thanks for the salvation of our people and the liberation and return of our capital, Jerusalem. Jews in Israel and in every country in which they reside come together in prayer and celebration. Similar to Hanukkah and Purim, it sometimes takes many years for the miracles to be fully recognized and celebrated. The Mizrahi World Movement is involved in massive community-wide celebrations across the globe, from London to Los Angeles, from Melbourne to Johannesburg to Chicago and Toronto. For 2,000 years, our hope never died. Our faith as a people never wavered. Wherever Jews were and whenever they prayed facing Jerusalem. Whatever happened the night before, whether it was the Crusades, the Inquisition, Muslim oppression, or Nazis in Germany, the next morning a Jew would wake up, dust himself off, put on his talit, face Jerusalem, and pray to come home, knowing somehow, some way, God would bring us back. This is our greatest celebration, to be alive in this generation, where the prayers of our fathers and mothers finally been answered. This is our greatest celebration.
Get it to go to the next page. Let's see. There we go. So we're not going to get too deep into this because I think we just have like 3 minutes left on the clock. But the 6-day war changed everything for them in many ways. They were jubilant. They could see God's hand in all of this, but now they had a problem they were going to be dealing with for the last 50-some years, which is what to do with the population who remained behind. Now, in the War of Independence of 48, a lot of the people who claim to be Palestinians now left and went to Jordan, but some remain, and then the 6-day war, more left, but it's been a continuous fight since then. So meanwhile, Nasser and the other Arabs were completely defamed around the world, and they were just constantly thinking about one thing: revenge. You know, how can we get this land back? So it's all building up to the Yom Kippur War of 73. So tell me why they would pick Yom Kippur. It wasn't just any Jewish holiday, it's the highest. It's like the Day of Atonement. Go ahead, somebody had their hand up. So this is why this one was so unexpected. And how many of you all have seen the new movie that came out with Helen Mirren playing Golda? Okay, we'll watch it because it's all about the Yom Kippur War. It's her struggle during this time. It's a phenomenally well acted, and it's all about what happened and that Israel almost lost it all. So can I get a reader for this slide, or I'll read it, whichever. Go ahead, Jacob.
On the afternoon of October 6th, Israel was attacked simultaneously on two fronts by Egypt and Syria. With the element of surprise to their advantage, Egyptian forces successfully crossed the Suez Canal with greater ease than expected, suffering only a fraction of the anticipated casualties, while Syrian forces were able to launch their offensive against Israeli positions and break through to the Golan Heights. The intensity of the Egyptian and Syrian assault, so unlike the situation in 1967, rapidly began to exhaust Israeli reserve stocks of munitions. Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir turned to the United States for aid, while the Israeli General Staff hastily improvised the battle strategy. The reluctance of the United States to help Israel changed rapidly when the Soviet Union commenced its own resupply effort to Egypt and Syria. U.S. President Richard Nixon countered by establishing an emergency supply line to Israel, even though the Arab countries imposed a costly oil embargo and various U.S. allies refused to facilitate the arms shipments.
Okay, so during the Six-Day War, President Johnson was in place, and the Israelis came to him and they said, look, we're about ready to be attacked on all these fronts. What are you going to do for us? And he says, okay, well, you have the green light to do what you need to do, but we're not going to be involved very much. In 1973, Richard Nixon was involved in the middle of what giant scandal? That was Watergate. And even during all that pressure and all that craziness, he supplied Golda with everything she needed. How did that come about? She had to constantly kind of go around his Jewish head of state, and that's a quite amazing story, but she called him at the White House at 3 o'clock in the morning. She's like, Richard, if you don't give us what we need now, Israel won't exist tomorrow. And he basically overnight flew all the stuff to her day after day to resupply. So I think we'll stop there and then pick up next time with this Yom Kippur War or 73 War. Thank you all. Does anybody have any questions about any of this so far? Okay, thanks.